right. Thank you. I thank you for the applause before I say anything. You know, if you get up halfway through and just, in a huff, that's perfectly fine. So I'm here to talk about the state of labor on Wisconsin dairy farms. This is work jointly with Tara Middleberg, who is a graduate student here and has done all the pretty graphs and things here. So labor is a key input. If you were at the morning presentation, Mike Brown said labor is the major thing that we have to worry about in the dairy sector, both on dairy farms and on the input side and the processing side. All of these things are really important. Access to adequate, affordable, and high-quality labor has forever been a key struggle. As Chuck has suggested, I started working on issues around Wisconsin dairy farms in the late 90s, and and we did interviews with dairy farmers, and I remember being in Athens, Wisconsin, and one of the larger dairies talking about, we used to hire high school kids, but they won't work on the farm anymore, and so we're not sure how we're going to do things going forward. So this has been, for 35 years, an important thing. Actually at the time in the 90s, it was the major constraint in whether farms could expand. So as we saw that there's been this great expansion of farm sizes, some of that is because of the availability of labor. That's a spigot that may not be open anymore as much. And so it also matters for farm technology. So increasingly there's interest in robotic milking as in many ways a substitute for labor. But that's a very high skill operation. If those robots don't just do all the work themselves, and so that still requires people and well-trained people. And the choices of what to raise and what to outsource from your farm is also often a labor issue. Immigrant labor has forever been part of the dairy industry. And in Wisconsin and all throughout the nation, it was Irish, Norwegians. When I first did these meetings with dairy farms across Wisconsin in the late 90s, people would say, this town, we're all German farms, and we're so much better than that town over there where they're all Irish. And you'd go to that town over there, and they're like, the Irish are the hardworking farmers, and Germans over there, they care about their knockwurst and not much else. So now it's that is the history of our state. That is the history of our country. These days, it's much more Mexican and Central American immigrants, but also still from all over the world. Another key piece of this is dairy farm work is hard work. And it's generally not that high paying, although what we're finding is that relatively these are not minimum wage jobs. So there are relatively few US-born workers beyond family labor who want to work in the dairy industry. That 35 years ago, that farmer saying, I used to hire high school kids and now they won't do this anymore. So you need a workforce. Also a thing, this is actually I learned from my friend Chuck, the realities of the next 5 years. I'm going to blame it on him. The realities of the next 5 years.
Analyst, not advocate.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, on his analysis, the next 5 years, we're likely to see at least the way things are going as of today or last week when I made these slides, is perhaps an era of declining milk prices due to retaliatory tariffs. Actually, Mike Brown was more optimistic on that this morning, so that was nice to hear. But an increase in cost of hiring U.S. labor and likely a decrease in availability, but also a decrease in availability of foreign labor, both legal and illegal, and perhaps an increase in the cost of farm machinery. So if you think, okay, we're maybe not going to have an influx of immigrant workers, but we can just buy robots. Well, those robots are going to cost more because they're not all made here. In fact, certainly most of the parts that they may be designed in North America, and actually not always in the U.S., sometimes across the border, in Canada. So those things are going to cost more. You know, there's some bright sides. Feed costs. Soybean prices, at least last week, looked like they were going to go down. This week, I don't know. Now the markets are open, so, you know, all bets are off. And who knows? There may be more government payments to farmers. So what did we know? So we set out to understand what's going on labor and dairy farms. And as I always do in my research, I say, somebody knows the answer to this. I'll go look it up, and then, you know, that'll be great. And yes, somebody knows the answer to this, but there are like 5 different answers, and they're a little bit all over the map. So, and that's in part because of the precarity of the workforce, the workers. So that makes it hard to study, which you should also know is true for the research I'm presenting, and means not everything is going to be accurate. There's a nationwide survey from 2015 that says immigrant labor accounted for 51% of all dairy labor, and dairy farms that employ immigrant labor produce 79% of the U.S. milk supply. So this is not surprising. They are particularly on the larger dairy farms. But also this study, these are folks at Texas A&M, pointed out that immigrant labor is very important in dairy input firms. So in production of feed, in feed mills and all of that. And so that's a part of the industry that may also be impacted. A study here in Wisconsin by Ibarra and co-authors find estimates from about 46% to as high as 90%, and conclude that maybe 70% of the U.S. of the workers in the Wisconsin dairy industry are foreign-born. And I'm going to use this sort of loosely as to what is immigrant, what is foreign-born. We actually, one of the things is that, and perhaps this is a good thing about the U.S., you really can't, generally you can't ask people about those things, and maybe we don't care. Or maybe we shouldn't care, but it does matter in terms of bringing in new workers. So here's our survey. This is a 2025 survey of Wisconsin dairy farms, which we did with the fine folk at UW River Falls. Shihira Burney helped us out with that. And we got about 1,200 return surveys, which was a 61% response rate of about half the Wisconsin dairy farms that we surveyed. So that's about a third of the Wisconsin dairy farms, depending on how many farms you actually think are in the state. I learned today the number was smaller than I thought. So we asked a bunch of different questions. Just our survey looks sort of broadly representative of in purple here we have the number of farms, and then the number of cows, and as you can see, the total cows are particularly on the 700 and above size operations. So they account for 6% of the farms and about 42% of the cows. This is all preliminary data. In fact, just yesterday we got 5 new surveys in, which is really nice, but I don't expect that to change much. All right, so I'm already at 5 minutes. All right, but you know about our data. So hiring by farm size. So if you see, this is the proportion of the farms that hire that type of worker. And if you see these very large farms, basically above 500 cows, more than 80% of the farms have both family workers and non-family U.S.-born and foreign workers. Wrong thing. If you look at the smallest farms, almost all of them have family workers and relatively few non-family hired foreign-born workers. So that is the kind of difference. Basically, below a farm size of about 100 cows, almost all the work is being done by family labor, which is from under 300 cows, there's relatively few farms that are hiring foreign-born workers. Above that, it's basically all of the farms. That's just, do you hire any laborers of this category? If you look at the workforce composition, this is the number of workers, and now, so obviously workers per farm is much higher in the larger farms, but you can see on the largest farms, foreign workers represent half or, more than a third of the workforce. Even on 500 to 700 cow farms, they're a little more than a third of the workforce. And then basically not very much in the under 300 cow zone. If we count up the workers that we've enumerated, we get about 57% of the hired workers on dairy farms are foreign-born. Now we're not counting. This is the hired workforce, so this doesn't include the family workforce. So this number would be smaller. Let's see. So what we're worried about is, will there be enough workers, right? And who's concerned about that? And so we asked, are you concerned about adequate access to farm labor? The darker colors here are extremely or very concerned. And what you see is that it's the sort of in this band from about 100 cows to about 700 cows where they're especially concerned about this. And less so on the largest farms. So the mid-sized farms are the most concerned about access to labor. Also another thing is workforce turnover is both high and low. So basically on almost most of the farms, on about 75% of the farms, the turnover is very low. Less than 25% of the workers are new each year. But there is this, about a quarter of the farms, where turnover is basically 75% new every year. And so that's where these I think labor issues are going to particularly bind. This is something we're going to dig into more to figure out sort of what who these farms are and kind of what's going on there. Other thing, wage rates are rising. For about half the workforce, or half of the farms, there was no change in what they paid their workers. But for the other half, on the order between $2 and more than $4 an hour increase in the last year. So the farms are having to pay more for their workforce, and I need to stop. So the wage distributions are fairly similar across U.S. and foreign-born workers for farms that hire both types. there are some differences in some of these farms, but the different types of foreign workers, the TN visas and H-2A, are actually quite well paid, or relatively well paid compared to others. So let's see, to conclude, there are some real constraints here. I think most of these constraints aren't binding yet, and with the new rules and regulations, that may change. But I think so. This is likely to be a big thing. The mid-sized farms are most likely to report feeling concerned about this. This is where I think the robots have perhaps the most potential. Some policy changes are probably necessary. So, bunch of caveats. Well, next steps, this is preliminary, and we need to investigate this further, and I think I will stop there. And maybe there's still time for a question.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I think we have time for one question, and it looks like we've got an eager participant. So there you go. I thought I'd have to run with the mic. So.
I saved you the trouble, yeah. My question was very simple. Do you have any breakdowns as to the countries of origin of the, or any changes therein?
We don't. Okay. And this is difficult research to do, and we don't have any breakdowns by country, and this is difficult research to do, and in some ways these are things that maybe we don't want to know. And so we're trying to characterize the industry overall, and so that's where we're at.
Why do you say don't want to know?
Well, I think there's a sense where some different types of foreigners are seen differently, and that I think from our point of view, I don't think we need to know that information. If we were sort of providing educational, if we were making recommendations about sort of education of the dairy workforce, we might want to know what language they spoke. But even there, we shouldn't care about necessarily where they're from.
All right, thank you, Jeremy, one more time. Thank you.